My own mother looked me dead in the eye and said the words that shattered my entire world. "We've all agreed you're not welcome at the wedding," and I was supposed to be her maid of honor. What I discovered next sent me down a rabbit hole of devastating family secrets and calculated lies that made me question everything I thought I knew about love and loyalty. Before we begin, tell me in the comments, what would be your first gut reaction to hearing those words? My name is Chloe Evans, and I invite you to listen to the story of how I was uninvited from my own sister's wedding. If I had to pinpoint the exact moment the ground began to shift beneath my feet, it was on a crisp October evening under the soaring ceilings of the Art Institute of Chicago. The air smelled of money, a specific blend of expensive perfume, old oil paint, and the faint metallic scent of ambition. My mother, Eleanor Vance Evans, was in her element, co-chairing one of her many fundraising galas. I, Chloe Evans, was there out of what she called familial duty, which was her elegant term for a mandatory appearance. My dress was a simple, severe column of black silk by a designer whose name my mother would pretend not to recognize. It was my armor, a stark contrast to the jewel-toned taffeta and fussy lace favored by Chicago's old guard elite. Standing there nursing a glass of champagne, I felt like a modern blueprint dropped into a dusty, gilded frame. My internal monologue, as always, was running on a low hum of architectural analysis, critiquing the structural integrity of the social posturing, the load-bearing smiles, the superficial facades. It was how I coped. You have to understand my family's structure to understand what happened next. My father, a kind and brilliant man, had passed away years ago. He left us with our mother, Eleanor, who in turn was left with two things of immense value: the prestigious Vance family name and the carefully guarded secret of its dwindling finances. To maintain the illusion of wealth, she had two pillars. The first was my younger sister, Maya. Maya was the artist, the beautiful, bubbly, creative soul who could do no wrong. She was the light, the dream, the living embodiment of the grace and talent the Vance name was supposed to represent. And then there was me. I was the anchor, the practical, pragmatic architect who had built a successful career from sheer force of will. I didn't just design buildings, I was the financial bedrock of our family's carefully constructed image. I paid for the emergency roof repairs on Mom's Lincoln Park brownstone. I subsidized Maya's unpaid internships. I was the silent, steady beam holding up the whole precarious affair. I never minded, not really, because for Maya, I would have done anything. The central performance of the evening began just after the silent auction closed. Liam Peterson, Maya's boyfriend of 2 years, led her to the center of the main hall, right under the iconic stained glass windows by Chagall. There was a subtle shift in the room, a collective holding of breath that felt rehearsed. I saw Liam catch my mother's eye for a fraction of a second, a tiny, almost imperceptible nod, and that's when I knew. This wasn't a spontaneous act of love, this was a production. He got down on one knee. The diamond was enormous, catching the light from the chandeliers and fracturing it into 1,000 tiny rainbows. It was a spectacle designed for the dozens of iPhones that suddenly materialized, their lenses pointed like a firing squad. The applause was deafening, the gasps of delight perfectly timed. I watched Liam, handsome and so very charming, slip the ring onto my sister's finger. But I saw what others didn't or chose to ignore. I saw the slight tremor in his hand that wasn't nerves, but calculation. I saw the eagerness in his eyes, an ambition that burned brighter than his love. He wasn't just marrying Maya, he was acquiring the Vance name, and my mother was the lead broker on the deal. While Maya was mobbed by well-wishers, her face a perfect portrait of ecstatic surprise, Eleanor glided over to me. Her smile was a masterpiece of social engineering, all warmth on the surface, with the cool, hard precision of a surgeon's scalpel underneath. "Isn't it wonderful, darling?" she murmured, her hand cool on my arm. "She looks happy, Mom. That's all that matters," I said, and I meant it. "Of course it is," she said, her eyes already scanning the room, assessing the impact. "This will be the social event of the season. a true reaffirmation of our family's standing. Her gaze settled back on me, and the warmth receded, leaving only business. You'll be the maid of honor naturally. And Chloe, she paused, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper, we'll need you to be generous. This is our family's moment. We can't let a little thing like a budget tarnish it. She waved a dismissive hand as if swatting away the very concept of financial limits. And there it was. I wasn't just the maid of honor. I was being named the chief financial officer of Operation Wedding. The old familiar weight settled onto my shoulders, the anchor being called upon to hold fast against the coming tide of my mother's extravagance. I wanted to say no. I wanted to tell her that Maya would be just as happy with a small, beautiful ceremony that didn't require a second mortgage. But then I looked across the room. I saw Maya, my Maya, twirling with Liam under the glittering lights, her laughter echoing in the grand hall. She was so blissfully, breathtakingly happy. And in that moment, her happiness was the only thing in the world that felt real. Of course, Mom, I heard myself say. Whatever Maya wants. Eleanor's smile finally truly reached her eyes. She had won the first battle. As she turned to accept the congratulations of a city councilman, I watched my sister lost in her perfect gilded moment. A storm cloud was gathering. I could feel it. A low-pressure system of love and obligation and impending disaster forming right over my head. I just thought I was planning a wedding. I didn't realize I was being cast as the villain in a play I hadn't even auditioned for. For a fleeting moment, everything felt right. The initial rush of wedding planning began with a deceptive, sun-drenched joy. We were at a trendy cafe in the West Loop, the kind of place with exposed brick and artisanal foam on the lattes. It was me, Maya, and our cousin Jessica, whom my mother had gracefully but firmly insisted be a bridesmaid. Jessica, with her perpetually wide eyes and an enthusiasm that never quite felt genuine, was already in performance mode. Your mother just has the most impeccable taste, Maya, she gushed, after Maya showed her a picture of the engagement ring for the 10th time. Whatever she plans will be simply divine. I ignored her, focusing on my sister. Maya's face was alight, not with talk of country clubs or 5-tier cakes, but with her own vision. There's this incredible loft space in Fulton Market Clos, she said, her hands sketching in the air. Exposed beams, huge industrial windows. We could hang fairy lights everywhere. And there's this photographer I follow on Instagram. Her stuff is so moody and real. Not all stiff and posed. I know exactly, I said, my own excitement building. I pulled a pen from my purse and started sketching on a napkin, the architect in me taking over. If we put the bar here, it creates a natural flow toward a dance floor here. We could use uplighting on the beams to make the ceiling feel infinite. For 10 beautiful minutes, it was just us again. The anchor and the artist building a dream on a paper napkin. Maya's eyes shone our shared language of creativity and structure flowing effortlessly between us. In that moment watching her, I would have paid for 1,000 champagne towers if it meant preserving that light in her eyes. It was a dangerous thought. The dream, of course, was promptly demolished a few days later on my mother's chosen turf, the exclusive, suffocatingly silent Everett Club. The place smelled of old leather lemon polish and quiet judgment. The dark mahogany walls seemed to absorb all the light, all the joy from our brunch meeting. Fulton Market, Eleanor said, taking a delicate sip of her tea. She set the cup down with a soft click. Charming, darling, but terribly down market for a wedding of this caliber. Maya's face fell. But Mom, I've already spoken with the event coordinator at the Four Seasons. Eleanor continued as if Maya hadn't spoken. I've placed a soft hold on their grand ballroom for a Saturday in June. It has the most magnificent city views. She smiled at General, bestowing a great favor. A Vance wedding, after all, requires a certain stature. I felt my jaw tighten. I thought we were going to look at venues together. Don't be difficult, Chloe, she said, her voice still smooth. Good dates at premier locations are booked years in advance. We were lucky to get it. Then came the photographer. When I mentioned Maya's preferred artist, Eleanor actually scoffed, a tiny, almost inaudible sound of derision. She slid a heavy portfolio across the polished table. It was for a man named Alistair Abernathy. The photos inside were relics from another era, stiffly posed couples, looking vaguely terrified with the waxy sheen of taxidermy. Alistair has photographed every significant wedding in this city for 40 years, Eleanor declared. He understands tradition. But the main event was the budget. Eleanor produced a slim leather-bound folder and opened it with a flourish. It wasn't a spreadsheet. It was a fantasy novel. The numbers were staggering, nearly 3 times what I had privately calculated. I saw line items that made my head spin. A $10,000 allocation for floral installations, $15,000 for a band I'd never heard of. There were actual listed expenses for ice sculptures and a multi-tiered champagne tower. I took a slow breath, trying to keep my voice even. Mom, this is a lot. I'm not sure this is financially realistic. Her expression, which had been one of benevolent patronage, instantly hardened. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Realistic, she repeated the word, tasting like an insult on her tongue. Chloe, this isn't about what's practical. This is about what is right for your sister. This is the one day in her life that is supposed to be a fairy tale. She leaned forward, her voice a low, dangerous weapon. Are you saying you don't want the best for Maya? And there it was. My logic, my practicality twisted into a lack of love, a failure of sisterly devotion. Before I could even respond, Jessica, who had been sitting quietly like a venomous little toadstool, chimed in. Oh, Chloe, don't you worry, she said with a saccharine smile. I'm sure we can find places to cut back. Maybe on some of the less important things. Her eyes flickered toward the budget line for Maya's chosen photographer. The message was crystal clear. I looked at Maya, pleading with my eyes for her to stand with me, to fight for her own vision. I saw the conflict warring in her face, the desire for her loft and her artist, and the lifelong conditioned terror of disappointing our mother. The terror won. Well, Maya said, looking down at her hands, maybe Mom is right, Chloe. It's just one day, just one day. The 3 words echoed in the oppressive silence of the club. My sister had chosen. She had chosen the fairy tale, and in doing so, she had chosen my mother. I felt something inside me, a small, vital support beam crack. I don't remember the rest of the meeting. I left feeling hollowed out, as if I'd just walked through a phantom limb. I tried calling Maya on my way back to the office, desperate to salvage that feeling from the cafe, but the call went straight to voicemail. The wall between us was already being built. That night, I sat in my office until after midnight, the city lights of Chicago glittering coldly outside my window. My desk was covered in blueprints for a new residential tower, clean lines, logical progressions problems with clear solutions. My professional life was a testament to order. My family life was a chaotic mess of emotional blackmail and unwritten rules. I knew what I should do. I should have set a boundary. I should have said no, but then I pictured Maya's face, that brief shining moment of pure joy at the cafe. And I did what I always did. I compromised. I decided to absorb the cost, telling myself it was the only way to keep the peace, the only way to protect Maya from the full force of our mother's wrath. I opened my laptop and created a new file, a detailed multi-tabbed spreadsheet to track every last vendor, every last deposit, every last dollar. It was an architect's attempt to impose logic on a situation that had none. I was drafting a blueprint for a disaster, trying to make it neat and orderly, completely unaware that the foundation of everything I thought I knew was already crumbling to dust. The first public blow came not as a shout, but as a whisper, a glittering, filtered digital whisper. It was a Tuesday night, and I was scrolling through Instagram before bed, a mindless habit to shut down my overactive brain. And then I saw it. A story posted by my cousin Jessica. It was a boomerang clip of 3 champagne flutes clinking together. In the background, out of focus, was a rack of pristine white dresses. The location tag was for a hideously expensive bridal boutique on Oak Street. My mother's manicured hand was unmistakable. So was Maya's, her new diamond flashing. The caption was a little masterpiece of passive aggression. Said yes to the dress with my favorite girls, followed by a hashtag that felt like a tiny, sharp needle to the heart. Hash made of honor who, a cold knot, the kind that feels heavy like a stone, tightened in my stomach. It wasn't just that they had gone without me. We had talked about this day since we were little girls, making veils out of pillowcases and promising we'd be there for each other. It was the public nature of it, a declaration, an erasure broadcast for our entire social circle to see. I called Maya immediately. The phone rang 4 times before she picked up, her voice breathless and artificially bright. "Hey, Chloe, what's up? I saw Jessica's story." I said, my own voice flat, devoid of emotion. "You went dress shopping." A pause, a beat of static-filled silence. "Oh my God, yes, it was totally last minute." She stammered the lie, clumsy and thin. "Mom had an old appointment she forgot to cancel just to browse, and we were walking by and we just popped in. And I found the one. It was crazy. I was literally going to call you right after to tell you all about it. I was going to call you." The 4 most dishonest words in the English language. I didn't push. I didn't argue. What was the point? The decision had been made. The picture had been posted. "I'm glad you found it, May," I said quietly, and we ended the call. That was the beginning of the ghosting. Suddenly, I was living in a world of after-the-fact discoveries. I found out they'd had a cake tasting when I ran into a friend who mentioned seeing my mother at a bakery raving about a lemon elderflower filling. I learned they had booked the band when Liam posted a #TBT photo with the lead singer. My calls to Maya were answered less and less. Our texts, once a constant stream of inside jokes and sisterly chatter, dwindled to brief, breezy replies. So swamped, tile sounds great, can't have a fitting. The easy intimacy we had shared our entire lives was being systematically dismantled, replaced by a strained, polite formality that was somehow more painful than silence. The real battle, however, was fought over the guest list. As maid of honor, a title that now felt utterly ceremonial, I was tasked with managing the RSVPs through an online portal. It gave me a godlike view of the battlefield, and the map was horrifying. My mother had added nearly 200 of her own social contacts, people whose names I vaguely recognized from charity programs, people Maya hadn't seen since she was a child, if ever. Meanwhile, a list of potential cuts had been created. On it were 10 of Maya's friends from her art school days. Also on the list, 3 of my own partners from my firm mentors. I respected people who had watched Maya grow up people she adored. I printed the lists and called a meeting. This time it was at my condo. I thought neutral ground might help. I was wrong. "What is this, Chloe?" my mother asked, scanning the papers with a dismissive air as if it were a tedious business proposal. "This is the guest list," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "And it seems to be missing a lot of people Maya actually cares about and includes, well, the entire membership of the Chicago Yacht Club." "Don't be dramatic," she snapped. "A wedding is a merger of families. Chloe, Liam's family, our family. It is a statement. Your work friends, bless them, simply don't fit the profile." "The profile?" I asked, incredulous. "My boss, who has offered Maya pro bono legal advice for her design business, doesn't fit the profile. You're being territorial and jealous because your friends were cut." Eleanor accused, her eyes like chips of ice. "You're trying to make this about you." I looked at Maya, who was staring intently at the pattern on my area rug. "Maya, do you really not want Sarah and Emily at your wedding, after they flew to New York just to see your thesis exhibition?" Maya fidgeted. "It's just, the numbers are getting so big, Chloe, and Mom has a point. It's for our future, too." And that's when Liam, who had been observing the entire exchange with a politician's calculated silence, finally spoke. He cleared his throat and placed a hand on Maya's shoulder, a gesture of ownership. "Chloe," he said, his tone reasonable, condescending, "Eleanor has a point. We have to think about the networking opportunities here." I just stared at him. "Networking opportunities?" "Absolutely," he said, warming to his topic. "This isn't just a party, it's a strategic event. A number of potential investors for my company's next funding round will be there. It's synergistic. Synergistic." He used the word synergistic to describe his own wedding. I looked from his earnest, ambitious face to my sister, who was now nodding in agreement. her eyes shining with the reflected brilliance of his strategy. She was completely sold, and in that moment, I realized with a sickening clarity that I wasn't just fighting my mother's snobbery anymore. I was fighting the ambitious, unified front of a power couple in the making. I had lost. That night after they left, my apartment felt cavernously empty. The save-the-date card was on my fridge held by a magnet. The design was beautiful, a delicate watercolor of the Chicago skyline that was pure Maya. But the names of the venue, the formal script, the entire feel of it was alien. It belonged to someone else's life. I found myself thinking about a day when Maya was 7. A bigger kid on the playground had pushed her off the swings, and I at the ancient age of 11 had felt a rage so pure and fierce it shocked me. I had marched up to that boy all righteous fury and made him apologize. I remember the feeling, that primal lioness instinct to protect my little sister from anything that could ever hurt her. Now I just felt helpless. I was watching her walk willingly into a gilded cage, and I couldn't do a thing to stop it. The truth settled on me then cold and heavy. I had been trying to save her from a wedding, but I was starting to realize the wedding was just a symptom. The disease was my family. If the ghosting was a slow, creeping frost, the character assassination was a wildfire. It moved faster than I could have imagined, scorching the earth of my reputation with calculated precision. The first scent of smoke came over a lunch of overpriced salads with Sarah, a woman who had been friends with my mother for decades, but had always shown a genuine warmth toward me. She spent the first 20 minutes of our meal shifting uncomfortably in her chair and avoiding my eyes. "Sarah, what is it?" I finally asked, putting down my fork. "You're acting like you're about to deliver a eulogy." She let out a shaky breath and pushed a piece of lettuce around her plate. "Chloe, it's just... I've been hearing things, and I feel you should know." She finally looked at me, her expression pained. "Eleanor has been telling people, well, that she's worried about you." Worried, I asked, a sense of dread coiling in my gut. "Worried about what she says? You've been under an immense amount of stress at work?" Sarah said the words coming out in a rush. "That you're not sleeping? That you're acting erratically? And that you're becoming very controlling and resentful about the wedding expenses?" I just stared at her, the clatter of the restaurant fading to a dull roar in my ears. It was brilliant. Diabolically brilliant. My mother wasn't telling people I was a bad person. She was telling them she was a worried mother. She was painting my valid concerns as mental instability, my practicality as resentment. It was genius in its cruelty, an accusation wrapped in the disguise of love. It made anyone who defended me seem cruel and insensitive. It all clicked into place, then the pitying looks from distant cousins, the abrupt change of subject when I approached a group of my mother's friends at a recent charity luncheon. They weren't judging me. They thought they were protecting a fragile woman on the verge of a breakdown. The situation escalated from a social problem to a professional crisis a few days later. I was in my office reviewing the structural plans for a new skyscraper when my direct line rang. It was Mr. Harrison, the firm's managing partner, a man I respected immensely. "Chloe, good morning," he said, his voice polite as always, but laced with an unmistakable thread of confusion. "I had a rather unusual call this morning. It was from your mother." My blood ran cold. "Oh," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Yes," he continued, a slight pause. "She expressed her deep concern that your workload here was causing you to have a personal crisis." My mind went blank with horror. "She was quite insistent," he added. "She even suggested that perhaps you needed to take a formal leave of absence for your own well-being." Mortification washed over me in a hot, sickening wave. She had done it. She had crossed the one line I had foolishly thought was sacred. She had brought her toxic manufactured drama into the one place I was safe, the one place I was respected for my mind and my competence. "Mr. Harrison, I am so profoundly sorry," I stammered, my cheeks burning. "I can assure you I am perfectly fine. My family is going through a complicated time, and my mother has misunderstood the situation." "I had no doubt of that, Chloe," he said kindly, though I could still hear the bewilderment in his voice. "Your work has been exemplary. I just thought you should be aware." We hung up and I sat staring at my computer screen, my hands shaking. The humiliation was a physical thing, a bitter taste in my mouth. My sanctuary had been breached. That was it. The fury that had been simmering beneath the surface finally boiled over. I grabbed my purse and walked out of the office, hailing a cab with a sharp, angry gesture. I gave the driver the address of the sleek glass and steel co-working space downtown, where Liam's startup Synergize had its headquarters. I found him in a glass-walled conference room, leading a meeting with a group of young, bright-eyed employees. He looked surprised to see me, but quickly wrapped up and met me in the hall. "Chloe." "Hey, what's up, everything okay?" he asked with a smooth, practiced smile. "No, Liam, everything is not okay," I said, my voice low and shaking with rage. "My mother called my boss today. She told him I was having a mental breakdown and tried to get me put on a leave of absence. I waited for the shock, the outrage on my behalf, the promise to march over to Eleanor's and put a stop to it. I got none of it. Instead, his smile faltered, replaced by a look of weary defensiveness. He led me to a small empty office and closed the door. "Okay, look," he said, sighing. "Chloe, you have to try and see it from Eleanor's perspective. She's under a lot of pressure, and she's just trying to manage a stressful situation." I stared at him speechless. "Manage it by trying to sabotage my career. She thinks you're unhappy, and honestly—" He hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck. "Maybe you have been a little intense lately. The whole guest list thing was a lot." And then he delivered the final devastating blow. "Eleanor and Jessica, they've been worried. They've told me and Maya about some of your outbursts, your demands. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Honestly, Chloe, Maya is starting to feel like you're trying to make her wedding all about you. This was it, the ultimate betrayal. It wasn't just my mother's wild campaign. Liam wasn't an innocent bystander. He was an active participant, a co-conspirator. He was listening to their poison, drinking it down, and then feeding it to my sister. He saw me not as family, not as the sister of the woman he was about to marry, but as an obstacle, an inconvenient variable in his meticulously planned merger of social and financial capital. I didn't say another word. I just turned around and walked out of the office past the optimistic young faces and the whiteboards covered in buzzwords. I stepped out onto the bustling Chicago streets, the city I loved, the skyline I had helped to shape with my own hands. And for the first time in my life, it all felt foreign and hostile. The towering buildings I usually saw as symbols of strength and ambition now felt like the walls of a prison closing in. I finally understood. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a family squabble. This was a coup, and I was being overthrown. The stage for my execution was a private yacht club on the shores of Lake Michigan, its windows looking out onto the vast black water. The event was the annual fundraiser for the so-called Vance Family Philanthropic Foundation, a vanity project that served as a thinly veiled excuse for my mother to hold court. The theme which she had chosen herself was A Night in Versailles. The ostentation was breathtakingly nauseating, gilded everything, waiters in powdered wigs and a string quartet, butchering Baroque music. I was there out of a final desperate sense of obligation, a fool's hope that I could corner Maya away from the puppeteers and have one last honest conversation. The air inside was thick and heavy, not with cigarette smoke, but with something far more toxic pity. As I moved through the crowd, people greeted me with a sort of morbid curiosity, their eyes lingering on me for a moment too long. They had all heard the whispers. They were all watching the slow-motion car crash. I saw my mother across the room, resplendent in a gaudy gold dress that looked like it had been stolen from a statue. She was a queen on her throne. Jessica, ever the loyal lady-in-waiting, hovered at her elbow, while Maya and Liam stood posed beside them like a prize-winning royal couple on loan from a museum. In their orbit, I was invisible. I tried to get to Maya 3 times. The first time as I approached Jessica, materialized out of nowhere, grabbing Maya's arm. "Oh, Maya, darling, you simply must meet the new curator from the Contemporary Art Museum. He's dying to talk about your design work," and she whisked her away. The second time, my mother intercepted me herself, placing a hand on my chest with a deceptively light touch. "Chloe, not now. The Baxters are here. Go be useful and say hello." The third time, Liam saw me coming and steered Maya toward the bar, his hand firmly on the small of her back. It was a perfectly choreographed defense. Finally, I saw my chance. Maya had slipped away from the group and was standing alone near the glass doors of the terrace, looking out at the dark lake. I moved quickly before her handlers could notice. "Maya, we have to talk," I pleaded, my voice low and urgent. "Please, just tell me what is going on." She flinched when she heard my voice. Her eyes, wide and panicked, darted over my shoulder, searching for her protectors. "Not now." "Chloe," she hissed, her voice trembling, "you're making a scene." And that's when the blade sharpened. For weeks began its descent. "She's not making a scene at all." My mother's voice, cool and smooth as silk, cut through the air behind me. She had approached without a sound. "Chloe, darling, I'm so glad you could make it." Her smile was a thin, sharp line, as bright and dangerous as broken glass. "Actually, we were just about to have a little family chat. Liam, Jessica, could you join us for a moment?" They appeared as if summoned, flanking her, forming a tight, impenetrable circle around Maya and me. The party swirled on around us, a dizzying blur of laughter and clinking glasses, but within our small circle, the air was still and cold. My heart began to pound against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. I knew. This was it. "There has been some discussion," Eleanor began, her voice perfectly modulated, low enough to be intimate, yet carrying the unmistakable weight of a royal decree, "about what is best for Maya's wedding day. We all want to ensure it's a happy, peaceful, and stress-free occasion for everyone." She looked pointedly at Liam, who gave a slow, solemn nod. She glanced at Jessica, who arranged her face into an expression of grave concern. Her gaze then drifted to Maya, who was staring intently at the tips of her own satin shoes as if they held the secrets to the universe. And then, finally, her eyes locked onto mine. There was no pretense of love left, no false warmth, only the cold, triumphant gleam of a predator cornering its prey. She delivered the final devastating line with chilling precision, each word a perfectly polished stone dropped into the silent pool of my dread, and after much careful consideration, we've all agreed it would be best if you didn't attend. She paused for a single exquisite beat. "You're not welcome at the wedding." The words didn't echo. They just hung there suspended in the air, sucking all the oxygen from my lungs. I couldn't breathe. It was the publicness of it all that made it so surreal, the smiling faces of strangers just feet away, the cheerful strains of Vivaldi from the quartet, the city lights glittering on the dark water. None of it was real. Only this nightmare circle was real. I looked past my mother, past her executioners, to my last hope. My sister. Maya. I whispered the name, a fragile puff of air. She finally looked up. Her beautiful, familiar face was awash with tears that spilled silently down her cheeks. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She just stared at me, her eyes screaming 1,000 things, pity, fear, apology, but her voice said nothing. Her silence was the final, brutal twist of the knife in my back. As if on cue, Jessica moved forward and placed a comforting hand on Maya's arm, pulling her sister-in-law to be closer. She shot me a look over Maya's shoulder, a fleeting, venomous glance of pure, unadulterated triumph, quickly masked by a mask of deep, sorrowful sympathy. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't say a word. I simply turned around, my movements stiff and robotic, and walked away from them. I pushed through the glittering, oblivious crowd, their laughter and chatter a meaningless, roaring sound in my ears. The brilliant lights of the party blurred into long, watery streaks of color. The guillotine had fallen. The 24 hours that followed the gala were not filled with tears. Tears would have been a relief, a release. Instead, there was only a profound and unnerving numbness, a hollow, echoing silence in the space where my heart used to be. I remember driving home from the yacht club, my hands steady on the wheel, my gaze fixed on the road. I did not cry. I did not scream. I felt nothing at all. It was the mind's ultimate act of self-preservation, a system-wide shutdown in the face of catastrophic failure. When I got back to my condo, I moved with a strange clinical precision. I sat down at my sleek, minimalist desk, opened my laptop, and began to dismantle. I deleted the master wedding planning folder with its subfolders for budgets, guest lists, and vendor contracts. Click, trash. I opened my calendar and deleted every entry marked Maya's fitting, venue walkthrough, cake tasting. Click, trash. I went through my phone and deleted every photo from the engagement party, every screenshot of a dress or a flower arrangement Maya had sent me months ago, back when we were still sisters. Click, click, click. Trash. I was a surgeon methodically excising a tumor from my own life. I slept, but it was not rest. It was just a blank space between the horror of last night and the cold reality of the new day. When the sun rose, casting long, pale fingers of light across my living room floor, something shifted. The numbness began to recede, not giving way to grief, but to something else entirely. It was a white-hot, focused anger, as clean and sharp as a shard of glass. The grief was still there, a heavy weight in my chest, but now it had a purpose. They had not just hurt me. They had tried to dismantle me, to humiliate me, to erase me. I would not be a victim in their vicious little play. I would not react with tears or pleas. I would respond with the only tools I had ever truly trusted: logic, precision, and leverage. My first move was financial. It was the clean, simple incision. I logged into the online portal for the joint account I had set up with Maya, the account into which I had poured thousands of dollars for deposits and initial payments. There was still a significant balance, my money earmarked for the venue's final installment. My fingers moved swiftly across the keyboard. I initiated a transfer of my remaining funds back into my personal savings account. The screen blinked, transfer successful. Then I navigated to the account settings. Close account. Are you sure? A small box asked. My lips curved into a smile that held no warmth. Yes. Next, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to the manager of the sought-after string quartet I had personally booked months ago. Good morning, I said, my voice perfectly level. I'm calling regarding the booking for the Peterson-Evans wedding in June. Due to unforeseen circumstances, we will no longer be requiring your services. There was a moment of confused sputtering on the other end, but I was polite, firm, and final. I made the same call to the custom lighting designer. I knew I would lose the deposits. I considered it, the cost of my freedom, a bargain at twice the price. My second move was professional. It was the sledgehammer, wrapped in velvet. Months ago, in a moment of sisterly love, I had offered Maya and Liam the ultimate wedding gift. As an architect, I had agreed to do the full consultation and preliminary design work for the massive renovation of the Lincoln Park Greystone they planned to move into after the wedding. It was a project worth well over $50,000 in professional fees, but the real value wasn't in the money. It was in my name. My architectural license, Chloe Evans AIA, was attached to the preliminary permit applications currently sitting in the labyrinthine bureaucracy of the Chicago Department of Buildings. And anyone in my business knows, without the final stamped and signed approval from the registered architect, that project was not just stalled. It was dead. It would be buried under months, if not years, of regulatory hell to get it restarted. I drafted a formal letter. The language was cold, legal, and impersonal. Please accept this letter as formal notification of my withdrawal from all architectural services related to the property at 2417 North Orchard Street, effective immediately due to unforeseen personal circumstances. I printed it on my firm's letterhead. I put 1 copy in a certified mail envelope addressed to Liam Peterson at his office. I scanned another copy and attached it to a new email, the recipient line addressed to the head of the city's planning department. I hit send. The chapter ended with me sitting on my sofa in my silent minimalist apartment. The only sound was the incessant angry buzzing of my phone on the coffee table. The screen lit up again and again. Eleanor, Liam, Eleanor. I let it buzz. On the table in front of me sat the small green and white certified mail receipt. It was a flimsy piece of paper, but it felt as solid and real as a deed, as a declaration of independence. They wanted to remove me from the family picture, so I removed my name from their blueprint. An architect knows that without a solid foundation, everything falls apart, and I had just pulled out the cornerstone. The fallout was immediate. The explosion was not a distant rumble. It was a direct hit. My phone, which had been buzzing with a kind of angry persistence, became a repository of their escalating panic. I didn't answer, but I listened to the voicemails. It was like listening to a storm build in real time. The first message from Liam was laced with a sort of arrogant confusion. "Hey, Chloe. Got a weird call from the city planning office. Something about a permit withdrawal. I think there's been a mistake. Call me back when you get this." An hour later, the second message. The confusion was gone, replaced by the sharp edge of annoyance. "Chloe, I just got the certified letter. What is this, a joke? This isn't funny. Call me." The third message, left near the end of the day, was pure, unadulterated rage. The smooth, charming veneer had been sandblasted away, revealing the raw ambition and fury beneath. "What the hell did you do?" he shouted into the phone, his voice cracking. "You are actively sabotaging us. After everything we've done to include you, you are ruining this." My mother's messages were less varied. They were pure venom from the start. A long, rambling tirade about how I was a vindictive, ungrateful, selfish monster, how I was trying to destroy my sister's happiness out of sheer jealousy, how I would live to regret this day. Listening to them was like dipping my head in acid. I deleted them all, and then amid the barrage of fury, an unexpected number from a New York area code flashed on the screen. For some reason, I answered it. "Chloe, it's your Aunt Carol." Her voice was a calm, steady island in the middle of my hurricane. Carol was my late father's sister, a brilliant, down-to-earth art history professor who had always maintained a healthy, cautious distance from Eleanor. "Hi, Aunt Carol," I said, my own voice sounding fragile to my ears. "Your mother called me this morning," she said, and I could hear the wry, humorless smile in her voice. "She gave me a 20-minute Oscar-worthy performance about your supposed breakdown." Cried and everything. She paused. "I've known my sister-in-law for 35 years, Chloe. I know a performance when I hear one. So, you want to tell me what really happened?" And for the first time, I did. The entire ugly story poured out of me, the exclusion, the gaslighting, the public execution at the gala. I told her everything, and she just listened, making small sounds of affirmation, never once judging or interrupting. When I finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Oh, honey," she finally said, her voice full of a deep, sad warmth. "This is classic Eleanor. This is her playbook. What do you mean she can't stand anyone she can't control?" Carol explained, her voice hardening slightly. "Especially successful, independent women. She did the same thing to your father's business partner back in the 90s, a man named Arthur Fleming. She decided she didn't like him, so she started a whisper campaign, told investors he had a drinking problem, told your dad's clients he was unstable. She poisoned the well until your dad, just to keep the peace, finally had to cut him loose. It almost ruined your father." I sat there, stunned into silence. This wasn't new behavior. This was a pattern, a weapon she had honed over decades. "You're not crazy, Chloe," my aunt said firmly, as if reading my mind. "You're just the latest target. Don't let her make you doubt yourself." That phone call was a lifeline. It was the first solid piece of ground I had stood on in months. It was validation. A second lifeline appeared the next day from an even more surprising place. I received a message request on LinkedIn. The name was Olivia Martin, and her profile picture showed a young, bright-eyed woman. The message was hesitant. "Hi, Chloe. This is probably incredibly unprofessional, but my name is Olivia. I was the junior event planner at the yacht club fundraiser. I overheard what happened, and there's something I think you need to know. We met for coffee the next morning." Olivia was clearly nervous, twisting a napkin in her hands. She was young, trying to make a name for herself in a tough industry. "My boss would fire me if she knew I was here," she began, her voice low. "But your mother and cousin, They were awful, not just to you, to my staff, to the caterers, just bullies. She took a deep breath. That's not why I contacted you, she said, finally meeting my eyes. The thing you need to know is, it was planned. The whole confrontation. Planned, I whispered. Yes, she said, nodding. About an hour before it happened, I was in a small service room just off the main hall checking on linens, and I saw them. Your mother and your cousin Jessica, they were in there rehearsing. Rehearsing their lines, Olivia confirmed, her eyes wide with the memory. Your mother was saying things like, "And then you put your hand on Maya's arm to show support." And Jessica was practicing her look of sad concern in a small mirror. They were staging it, the whole thing. She also told me how during the planning process, Jessica was constantly misplacing invoices that I had already paid, only to find them days later, making me look disorganized and unreliable to the other vendors. The coffee cup felt cold in my hands. This wasn't just a spontaneous act of cruelty in the heat of the moment. This wasn't my mother losing her temper. This was premeditated. This was psychological warfare planned and executed with military precision. The knowledge didn't break me. It did the opposite. It solidified my resolve into something as hard and unyielding as steel. I had not overreacted. In fact, I had underestimated the depth of their deception. "Thank you, Olivia," I said, my voice clear and strong. "You have no idea what this means to me." "Honestly," she said, a small defiant smile on her face, "after the way they treated my team, it was my pleasure." I walked out of the coffee shop and into the bright Chicago sunlight. I finally felt like I could breathe again. I was not alone. I had allies I never would have expected, and I understood a fundamental truth. No matter how carefully you try to plaster over the cracks, eventually the truth finds a way to seep through, and a flood was coming. With the wedding just 3 weeks away, the carefully constructed facade of their perfect life began to develop catastrophic structural failures. I learned later that the city had officially put a stop work order on the Lincoln Park gray stone, citing the lack of an active architect on the permit. The final, non-refundable payment for the Four Seasons ballroom was due, and without my withdrawn funds, they were scrambling to cover it. The panic must have been exquisite. Their first move, their first desperate gambit, was to send in the dove, to send in Maya. She showed up at my condo on a Sunday afternoon unannounced. I saw her through the peephole, looking pale and small on my doorstep, and my heart gave a painful lurch. This was the first time I had seen her, the first time we had spoken since the gala. I opened the door. She looked exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes that her concealer couldn't quite hide. She started in before she was even fully inside, her voice tight with a rehearsed-sounding desperation. "Chloe, how could you do this?" she began, her hands twisting the strap of her purse. "You're ruining everything. The house is completely stalled. Mom is an absolute wreck. You're destroying my wedding." I didn't get angry. I didn't raise my voice. The white-hot rage from before had cooled into something else, something clear and calm and terribly sad. I just closed the door behind her and leaned against it. "Am I Maya?" I asked quietly. "Or did you all do that already? That's not fair," she cried, her voice cracking. "We were just trying to make things less stressful." I let the silence hang in the air for a moment. I didn't bring up the planner's story of their rehearsal. I didn't mention the lies or the sabotage. I wanted to see if there was anything left of my sister under the layers of manipulation. I asked her the only question that mattered. "Maya," I said, my voice soft, "when Mom said those words to me at the party, when she said I wasn't welcome, did you agree with her?" She faltered. Her eyes dropped to the floor, to her hands, to the enormous diamond on her finger, which she began to twist round and round. She stammered, "It wasn't like that. It was complicated." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Mom and Liam, they said it was the only way to have a peaceful wedding." "A peaceful wedding?" I repeated the words, feeling like ash in my mouth. "A wedding without your only sister is peaceful." Tears welled in her eyes, tears of frustration and confusion. She looked trapped. I don't know. She finally sobbed the script forgotten. I don't know what to think. I don't know who to believe anymore. She turned and fled, leaving my apartment as abruptly as she had arrived. The conversation ended in a stalemate, but I had my answer. She hadn't said yes, but she hadn't said no. And that I was beginning to learn was just as bad. Their next move was a classic Eleanor power play. If you can't get what you want through emotional blackmail, you go over their head, you escalate. She scheduled a meeting with my boss, Mr. Harrison. The official request sent to his assistant was under the guise of a wealthy prospective client interested in commissioning a major residential project. Her real goal, I knew, was far more insidious. She was going to corner him, fill his ears with her poisonous narrative of my instability, and try to pressure my firm, my own boss, into forcing me to sign off on the Greystone plans to protect my professional reputation. But thanks to Aunt Carol's story about Arthur Fleming, I saw it coming. The day before the scheduled meeting, I requested a private chat with Mr. Harrison. I sat in his office, the one where I had been humiliated by her phone call just weeks before, and I laid out my hand. I gave him a condensed, professional, and entirely factual account of the situation. "Mr. Harrison," I said calmly, "my mother is engaged in a severe family dispute with me. She is attempting to use my professional license as leverage. She is not a prospective client. She is coming here tomorrow to try and force my hand. I wanted you to be aware of the context." He listened patiently, his expression unreadable. When I was done, he simply nodded. "Thank you for your transparency, Chloe. I will handle the meeting." And he did. I heard about it afterward from his executive assistant, who recounted it with a certain theatrical flair. Eleanor arrived dressed to the nines, all charm and manufactured grace. She began her performance speaking of her deep love for both her daughters and her concern for the stress I was under. And then she made her move suggesting that perhaps the firm could encourage me to see reason regarding a small family real estate matter. Mr. Harrison, I was told, did not lose his composure. He simply held up a hand to stop her. "Eleanor," he said, using her first name, a clear power move of his own, "this firm does not under any circumstances involve itself in the personal or familial matters of its architects. Chloe Evans is one of our finest. Her professional conduct is and has always been impeccable." He then stood up. "Now, if there is no actual project you wish to discuss, I have another meeting to attend." He had shown her the door, publicly, professionally. She had played her trump card, and it had been countered with a polite, devastating, and final rejection. She must have left his office in a state of apoplectic fury, because an hour later my phone lit up with a single chilling text message. It was from her. It contained only 8 words: "You will regret this for the rest of your life." I stared at the message on the screen. The threat was so stark, so absolute. A month ago it would have terrified me. It would have sent me spiraling. But now, looking at those words, all I felt was a strange, hollow sort of pity. Her arsenal was empty. Her weapons were useless. This wasn't the roar of a lioness. It was the desperate, pathetic screech of a queen who had just been checkmated, and she knew it. I didn't know it at the time, of course. I only learned the details of Maya's unraveling later pieced together from tearful late-night confessions in my living room. But while I was finding my footing, my sister was losing hers in a gilded cage that was rapidly becoming a pressure cooker. The Lincoln Park brownstone, she told me, had stopped feeling like a home and had become a command center for a failing campaign. Liam was a constant, stressed-out presence, his easy charm replaced by a short temper, snapping about stop work orders and non-refundable deposits. And my mother and Jessica, they were always there. Their cloying, suffocating support had begun to feel like surveillance, their every question, a test, their every suggestion, a command. The first crack in her reality appeared on a Tuesday night. She was on Liam's laptop, searching for the caterer's contract to confirm a menu detail. She typed caterer into his email search bar, and a list of messages popped up. One of them from 2 weeks before the gala caught her eye. It was a thread between Liam, Eleanor, and Jessica. The subject line was cold, corporate, and utterly chilling. The Chloe problem. Her hand, she said, started to tremble. She clicked on it, and she read, She read in dawning horror as the three of them, her fiancé, her mother, her cousin, strategized her sister's removal. She saw my mother's directives about portraying me as unstable. She saw Jessica's gleeful suggestions for how to exclude me from events. But the worst part, the part that made the blood drain from her face, were Liam's own words. He wrote about the need to neutralize her influence before she could disrupt their plans. He wrote, "If we frame it as a unanimous decision, she'll have no ground to stand on. It has to be airtight." The screen blurred. The words swam. This wasn't him being manipulated. This wasn't him just going along to keep the peace. This was active. This was strategy. This was a man she had promised to spend her life with, coldly planning the psychological execution of her sister. My quiet question to her in my condo echoed in her head, "A wedding without your only sister is peaceful." That email was the first loose thread. And Maya, my gentle artistic sister, she began to pull. She started digging, driven by a sick, desperate need to know. She thought back to all the little inconsistencies. She remembered me telling her I'd call the florist only for Jessica to sweep in a day later, saying, "Don't worry, I handled it. Chloe must have forgotten." She remembered the dress shopping appointment that was supposedly last minute, but saw an email from my mother to Jessica a week prior confirming the time. Then she took the biggest step. She logged into the online banking portal for the joint account, the one I had already closed. But the transaction history was still there, and she saw it, in black and white. The large, significant transfers from my personal account in the very beginning, covering the initial deposits for the venue and the caterer. It was irrefutable proof, a direct contradiction of the story she'd been fed for months, that I had been stingy and unsupportive from the start. The final devastating proof, the one that blew the entire structure to smithereens, came from the most unimpeachable source imaginable. Their grandmother, Eleanor's own mother, a sharp-witted, no-nonsense woman living in a retirement community down in Florida, called her. "Maya, darling," her grandmother's voice crackled over the phone, "I just had a very long, very illuminating chat with your Aunt Carol." A pause. "It seems your mother is up to her old tricks. Let me tell you about a man you've never heard of. His name was Arthur Fleming," and she told her. She told Maya the entire sordid story of my father's business partner, the whispers of instability, the social isolation, the financial manipulation, the exact same playbook used decades earlier to destroy another person who stood in my mother's way. The house of cards didn't just tremble, it collapsed into a pile of dust. That night, Maya confronted Liam. She laid her phone on their kitchen island, the damning email thread glowing on the screen. He tried to justify it, his voice losing its confident swagger. "I was just trying to protect you, May," he tried to explain, "from all the stress, the negativity." But the lie was a pathetic transparent. His naked ambition was laid bare for her to see. Her next stop was the Lincoln Park brownstone. She found Eleanor and Jessica in the living room smugly reviewing linen samples, and she unleashed years of suppressed truth. It was an explosive screaming match. My mother cornered cycled through her entire arsenal. First, denial. "I have no idea what you're talking about." Then rage. "How dare you accuse me?" Then the crocodile tears. "I only ever wanted what was best for you." And finally, the ultimate weapon, victimhood. "After everything I have done for you, you ungrateful child." But Maya, armed with the cold, hard truth, was immune for the first time in her life. "You didn't do this for me," she screamed, her voice raw with betrayal, tears streaming down her face. "You did this for you, for your parties and your friends and your stupid, empty reputation. You did this for you." She turned and ran from the room, leaving them in the stunned silence. She went upstairs, threw a few things into an overnight bag, and walked out of that house for what she knew would be the last time in a very long time. She got in her car, the city lights a blur through her tears. She didn't drive to Liam's apartment. She didn't drive to a friend's. She drove to the only place in the world that felt safe. Later that night, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find my sister standing on my doorstep in the pouring rain, her face broken, her hair soaked, her mascara running in black rivers down her cheeks. She didn't say hello. She just fell into my arms, her body trembling with huge, gut-wrenching sobs. "You were right," she choked out, her voice muffled against my shoulder. "Chloe, you were right. You were right about everything." The days that followed were not filled with the fire of anger or the storm of confrontation, but with the quiet, steady rain of grief and healing. Maya stayed with me. My minimalist condo, usually a sanctuary of solitude, became a haven for two. We existed in a bubble of shared trauma. We drank endless cups of tea. We sat in silence for hours, the unspoken understanding between us a heavier presence than any conversation could be. And then, slowly, we began to piece the story together, laying out the jagged shards of the past few months on my living room floor to see the whole ugly picture. I told her about Olivia the planner, about the cold, calculated rehearsal for my public humiliation. Her face crumpled as she listened each detail a fresh wound. In return, she opened her laptop and showed me the email thread, the Chloe problem. Seeing it myself, seeing Liam's clinical words about needing to neutralize my influence sent a chill through my bones that had nothing to do with the autumn air outside. She told me about our grandmother's phone call, about the ghost of a man named Arthur Fleming, and the realization that we were not the first to be targeted by our mother's playbook. It was a painful, necessary autopsy of our family's sickness, with every shared piece of evidence, every confirmed lie. The fractured bond between us began to knit itself back together, not as it was, but as something stronger forged in the fire of a shared truth. Meanwhile, the outside world was in full panic mode. Maya's phone was a constant source of anxiety, buzzing incessantly on the coffee table. The barrage from Liam was relentless, a chaotic swing between desperate apology and wounded accusation. "Maya, baby, please call me. I love you. We can fix this." Followed 10 minutes later by, "Are you seriously just going to throw everything away because of a misunderstanding?" He showed up one evening. The buzz from the intercom was sharp and demanding. Maya flinched, looking at me with wide, terrified eyes. I walked over to the panel, my heart steady. I was the anchor again, but this time I wasn't holding up a facade. I was protecting my sister. "Yes," I said, my voice calm. "Chloe, it's me. Let me in. I need to talk to Maya." Liam's voice crackled through the speaker. I looked over at Maya, who shook her head silently. I pressed the button again. "She'll talk to you when she's ready, Liam. Not before," I said, and then I shut the intercom off, cutting off his sputtering reply. I had been unable to shield her before. I would not fail again. It was in that moment of shared quiet strength that we decided on our path forward. "The wedding can't happen," Maya said, her voice small but firm. "Not like this. It's a lie." "I know," I said. "So what do? We set the terms." She said, a spark of the old Vance fire in her eyes, but this time it was aimed at justice, not social standing, not for surrender, for reconciliation, on our terms. We spent the next day at my dining room table drafting our proposal. It wasn't a list of demands, it was a blueprint for a healthier future, a structure with clear, load-bearing boundaries. The meeting took place 2 days later on neutral ground. Aunt Carol, who had flown in from New York at my request, had booked a large suite at the peninsula. She was our moderator, our witness, our quiet source of strength. We sat on one sofa, Maya and I, a united front. Across from us, looking deeply uncomfortable, sat Liam. My mother and Jessica arrived together, sweeping in with an air of beleaguered righteousness, as if they were the ones who had been wronged. We began. Calmly, methodically, we presented our case. We didn't shout. We didn't cry. We simply stated the facts. I spoke of the conversation with Olivia, the staged confrontation. Maya spoke of the email thread, the lies about the vendors, the financial discrepancies. We laid out the evidence piece by damning piece. Jessica tried to lie, her voice high and shrill. "That's not true. I never said that." But when I mentioned Olivia's name and her willingness to sign a sworn affidavit, the color drained from her face and she fell silent. My mother remained defiant, a mask of cold fury on her face. "This is a ridiculous, hysterical fantasy, a conspiracy." That's when Aunt Carol spoke for the first time. "Is it Eleanor?" she asked, her voice quiet but carrying immense weight. "Does the name Arthur Fleming sound like a fantasy to you?" My mother froze. Her eyes darted to Carol, and for the first time I saw a flicker of genuine fear. Then it was Maya's turn. She stood up holding a single piece of paper. Her hands were trembling slightly, but her voice was clear and strong. "This is not a negotiation," she said, looking at each of them in turn. "These are the terms for any possible future relationship with us." She read from the paper. 1. The wedding is officially postponed indefinitely. Liam flinched as if struck. 2. Jessica, she said, her eyes locking on our cousin, you will no longer be a part of my life in any capacity. We are done. Jessica let out a small gasp. 3. Liam, if you want any chance of a future with me, you will enter individual therapy to understand what you did and why you did it, and you will do it alone. She looked at him, her heart breaking, but her resolve firm. And 4, she said, turning to our mother, you will enter intensive family therapy with us, with a therapist of Chloe's and my choosing. If you refuse, you will be cut off, completely, from both of your daughters. The silence in the room was absolute. My mother stared at Maya, her face a mask of disbelief and rage. She let out a short, sharp laugh, devoid of all humor. You would choose her, she spat, jutting her chin towards me over your own mother. Maya looked at me, and I gave her the slightest, almost imperceptible nod. Then she turned back to the woman who had raised us. Her voice was steady. It was the voice of a woman who had finally found her footing. I'm not choosing her over you. Maya said her words, precise and devastating. I'm choosing truth over lies. I'm choosing health over toxicity. She took a deep breath. The choice of whether you're in my life is now yours. My mother stared, her mouth opening and closing silently for a moment. Then, with a look of pure murderous hatred aimed at both of us, she stood up, grabbed her purse, and stormed out of the suite, slamming the door behind her. We were left in a stunned, exhausted silence. The war was over. And in the quiet aftermath, we all knew the difficult, painful work of peace was just about to begin. The 6 months that followed the confrontation in that hotel suite were not a neat and tidy epilogue. They were messy. They were the architectural equivalent of a gut renovation, tearing everything down to the studs, exposing the rot in the walls, and painstakingly rebuilding one beam at a time. The work was slow, imperfect, and exhausting. My mother faced with 2 unthinkable prospects, the complete loss of both her daughters, and perhaps even more terrifyingly, the public humiliation of the indefinitely postponed society wedding, reluctantly agreed to therapy. She did not enter the therapist's office a changed woman. She entered it like a queen being led to a tribunal. The first few sessions, Maya and I were told, were exercises in deflection and martyrdom. But Dr. Albright, the therapist we had chosen, was a skilled and patient woman. She chipped away at the marble fortress of Eleanor's denial, not with a sledgehammer, but with a tiny, persistent chisel. Slowly, very slowly. Small cracks of accountability began to appear. Not remorse, not yet, but a grudging admission that her actions had consequences. It was a start. Liam, to my genuine surprise, embraced his own therapy with a seriousness I hadn't expected. He wasn't just going through the motions to win Maya back. He was genuinely horrified by his own actions, by the ease with which he had adopted Eleanor's cruel calculus. He was forced to confront the fact that his ambition, the thing that drove him, had made him susceptible to a moral poison. His relationship with Maya was tentative, fragile. They started over, they went on dates, they talked for hours, not about wedding plans, but about their values, their fears, their families. They were rebuilding on a new foundation of brutal honesty, and it was a slow, arduous process. But the most important healing happened between me and Maya. The aqueduct of sisterhood, which had been so thoroughly poisoned, began to run clear again. We took a weekend trip, just the 2 of us, to a quiet little town on the Michigan coast. We walked along the shore, the cold November air sharp against our faces. We sat in a cozy bookstore for hours, drinking coffee and just being together. And we talked. We really talked for the first time in years, free from the suffocating influence of our mother. I admitted something I had barely even admitted to myself, that there were times I resented her resented her for being the artist while I had to be the anchor, resented how easily things seemed to come to her while I had to fight and claw for every inch of my success, and she in turn admitted her own secret. She told me she had always been jealous of me, not of my money, but of my freedom. "You were always so strong, Chloe," she said, her voice quiet. "You just decided who you were going to be, and you became it. You never needed anyone's permission. I always needed Mom's. I didn't know how to exist without it." It was a confession that unlocked everything. In that shared vulnerability, we found our way back to each other, not as the roles we had been assigned, but as sisters, as equals. That catharsis changed something in me too. Back in Chicago, I threw myself into a new project at my firm. It wasn't a glittering skyscraper or a luxury condo development. It was a community arts center in a struggling neighborhood. A pro bono project the firm took on for tax purposes, but for me, it became a passion. I worked with local artists. I designed spaces for kids to paint and sculpt and dream. It was fulfilling in a way no multi-million-dollar contract had ever been. I realized how much of my identity I had wrapped up in being the family's savior, the financial rescuer, designing that arts center. It felt like designing a new version of myself, one built on my own terms. And then, one rainy Saturday in April, 6 months after the confrontation, Maya and Liam came over to my condo. They looked different, calmer, more solid. "We're ready," Maya announced, a quiet, confident smile on her face. Liam stood beside her, his hand holding hers, his expression one of humble support. This time there was no talk of ballrooms or society photographers. The planning was done by them and them alone. My role was simply to be a sister offering advice when asked, celebrating their choices. They decided on a small, simple ceremony, 30 guests, at the Chicago Botanic Garden under a canopy of trees. It was everything she had told me she wanted on that long-ago day at the cafe. It was her wedding. She pulled a small, elegant invitation from her purse and handed it to me. The paper was thick, the design a simple, beautiful sketch of a peony, her favorite flower. "There's something else," she said, her eyes shining. She took a deep breath. "I need a maid of honor, the best one I know." She squeezed my hand, her grip firm. This time for real. Tears welled in my eyes, the warm, healing kind. "Of course," I whispered. "There's nothing in the world I would want more." The chapter ends there with the three of us, me, my sister, and the man who was working so hard to be worthy of her, standing in my living room, looking at that simple, perfect invitation. It wasn't a social statement. It wasn't a merger. It was a testament, a new blueprint drawn not for status, but for survival and finally, for love. The wedding day arrived, not with a frantic, stressful bang, but with the soft, quiet peace of a perfect June morning. The Chicago Botanic Garden was a world away from the cold marble and gilded pretense of the Four Seasons. Here, the only chandeliers were the dappled sunbeams filtering through the leaves of ancient oak trees. The only music was the sound of a lone cellist playing something simple and beautiful, the notes drifting on the warm breeze. There were no ice sculptures, no champagne towers. There were just 30 chairs, a canopy of peonies and trailing ivy, and the quiet, profound joy of a day that was finally, truly about love. My mother was there. She wore a simple, elegant navy dress, a stark contrast to the Versailles gold she had planned. She was subdued, quiet. A fragile truce existed between us now, forged in the sterile, neutral territory of Dr. Albright's office. She was polite to me, our interactions brief and not entirely uncomfortable. "Chloe, that color is lovely on you." "Thank you, Mom. You look very nice." She was not the center of attention, and for the first time in her life she seemed to be okay with that. It was progress. Jessica, of course, was nowhere to be seen. I stood beside Maya, holding her bouquet of peonies. She looked radiant, not like a princess in a fairy tale, but like a woman who had fought a war and won, like a woman who knew her own worth. When she and Liam exchanged their vows, they had written themselves full of inside jokes and raw, honest promises. I saw the way he looked at her. The ambition was gone from his eyes, replaced by a deep, humbling gratitude. He knew how close he had come to losing her, and he looked like a man who would spend the rest of his life making sure he deserved a second chance. The reception was held at a small Michelin-starred restaurant with a private garden. Over dinner, as the sun set and candles flickered on the tables, it was time for my speech. I stood up, my champagne flute in hand, and looked at my sister. "I've been thinking a lot lately about what we do," I began, my voice steady. "As an architect, my job is to build things, structures that are strong, functional, and hopefully beautiful." I smiled at her. "Maya, as an artist, your job is to create beauty where there was none before. In our own ways, we've always been architects, you and I." I told a short, funny story about us as children building a magnificent, ridiculously complicated fort out of every pillow and blanket in the house, a structure so elaborate that our dad had to crawl on his hands and knees to bring us snacks inside. "But the most important thing any architect knows," I continued, my voice softening, "is that you can't build something lasting on a weak foundation. You can't just paint over the cracks and hope for the best. Sometimes you have to tear a faulty structure down, right down to the studs. You have to expose the rot, face the ugly truth of what's broken, so that you can build something stronger and more honest and far more beautiful in its place, something with a foundation of truth." My eyes met Maya's across the room, and the look that passed between us was a novel in itself, a story of pain and forgiveness, and a profound, hard-won, unbreakable love. To my sister, the finest architect of beauty I have ever known, and to Liam, the man who is lucky enough to live in the world she builds. To Maya and Liam. Later that evening, as guests mingled, I found myself standing alone for a moment by the French doors, looking out at the twilit garden. "He would have been so proud of you, you know." I turned. It was my Aunt Carol, holding a glass of wine, her eyes soft. "Of both of you," she said quietly. "He always worried that your mother's ambitions would get in the way of your bond. He would have been so proud to see you both find your way back." A wave of emotion, one I hadn't allowed myself to feel all day, washed over me. A sense of peace so deep, it felt like my father's hand on my shoulder. And now, as I tell you this story, a few years have passed. My relationship with my mother is a work in progress. It is a structure defined by careful, necessary boundaries. Some days are stronger than others. Maya and Liam are blissfully happy. They bought a small, charming bungalow in a quiet neighborhood, no major renovation required. They are expecting their first child, a daughter. They're naming her Caroline after the aunt who became our lifeline. And me, I'm a partner at my firm now. The community arts center I designed won an award, and it's the accomplishment I am most proud of. And I met someone, a landscape architect, a man who knows the importance of strong roots, a man who loves my strength instead of being threatened by it. Tearing down my family's toxic structure was the most difficult and the most profoundly liberating thing I have ever done. They told me I wasn't welcome at the wedding, and in the end, they were right. I wasn't welcome at that wedding, the one built on lies and for show, but I was essential to the one that mattered, the one built on love, because I wasn't just a guest. I was one of the architects. So that's my story. It ended in a beautiful garden with vows and forgiveness and the promise of a new beginning. But the most important part of the story wasn't the ending. It was the demolition. It was the painful, terrifying, and ultimately liberating process of taking a sledgehammer to a structure that was about to collapse on top of me. When I look back on it, all the biggest lesson wasn't simply about standing up to a manipulative parent or a weak-willed partner. It was about understanding the roles we are assigned in our families and finding the courage to ask ourselves, did I ever actually audition for this part? I was the anchor. It was my identity. It felt noble, it felt necessary, but it also meant that my worth was tied to how much weight I could carry. I was valued for my function, not for myself. Maybe for you, it's a different role, the peacemaker, the problem child, the comic relief. We get cast in these parts so early that we forget we're even acting. We forget that we have the power to walk off the stage, and that brings me to the first hard truth I had to learn. Keeping the peace is often just a pretty name for enabling chaos. For years I made concessions, I wrote checks, I bit my tongue, all in the name of avoiding conflict. But I wasn't creating peace. I was just delaying the inevitable collapse, and my silence was the mold that allowed the rot to spread. True peace doesn't come from avoidance. It comes from daring to have the difficult conversations, from building something on a foundation of truth, even if it means tearing the old structure down first. The second lesson is about where we find our value. My professional life was my sanctuary because it was a meritocracy. I was rewarded for my skill and my hard work. In my family, I was rewarded for my compliance. And I had to learn that my value as a person, as a sister and a daughter, wasn't measured by what I could provide or how much I could endure. Your worth is not transactional. It is inherent. It is yours, and it is not up for negotiation. I suppose if I had to distill all of this pain and rebuilding into a single thought, it would be this: the structures we build in our lives are only as strong as the truths we are willing to build them upon. My story is just one story, a blueprint of one family's flawed design, but it makes me wonder about yours. Have you ever felt like you were cast in a role in your own family that you didn't choose? What role was it? I'd genuinely love to hear your thoughts on this. When does keeping the peace cross the line into enabling destructive behavior? Where do you personally draw that line? And maybe from a different perspective. Have you ever had to be confronted with a hard truth about your own actions? How did you handle it? There are no easy answers here, and every family dynamic is a world unto itself. If this story made you think, or if it resonated with a piece of your own experience, I'd be honored if you'd leave a comment below. Our stories are how we learn from one another, and if you enjoy exploring these complicated, messy, and ultimately hopeful parts of life, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. That way, you won't miss the next story we unpack together. Thank you for listening.